Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Cruising your way next, Off 90, the first woman elected to Congress from Minnesota, bringing outstanding music to Albert Lea, an artist from a poor farm, and a place for pencils. These stories and more are coming up on your next stop, Off 90. Hi, I'm Barbara Keith. Thanks for joining me on this trip, Off 90. Cornelia Knutson, more commonly known as Coya, was a teacher in Oakley, Minnesota until she was elected to Congress in 1954. She was the first woman ever elected to Congress in Minnesota, and she served until she lost her re-election campaign after her husband publicly called her home in 1958 with the famous line, "Coya, come home."
I was fascinated with this achievement of hers because I did move to the area right by Oakley in 1960. There were no women in public life at all, not on a school board or a county board or so on. And it was not, I just couldn't imagine how she had achieved that, just from a personal look around. I am Gretchen Ernest Bido. I have written and published some books. The major book is Coya, Come Home, the biography of a woman who was a teacher in Oakley, Minnesota. She got elected to the United States Congress in 1954 when I was earning a master's degree in history at the University of North Dakota. When I went into history, they didn't really know what to do with me in the history department. What I wanted to write about and learn about was rural women. This fit the bill. Cornelia Gestall was born in 1912 in North Dakota. When she was in her early 40s, she got herself elected to the United States Congress. The first woman in Minnesota to do so. In Congress, she achieved a lot. She started the student loan program. She did that. She got the first research for cystic fibrosis. And then she, of course, was always working for farmers. She definitely was working for the place she was from. So her legislative accomplishments should have been in good stead for her. That time in Washington, women were not in front. And David Broder, who was a commentator at the time, talked about Jackie Kennedy now. This is 1960. He said, you cannot imagine the maleness of Washington, D.C. in the 50s and the 60s. She had gotten a letter from her husband named Andy, who was back in Oakley, Minnesota. He did not move to Washington with her. And she received a letter which she expected was, again, a letter saying he needed money. And she opened it, but he said, Coya, I don't want you in Congress. I want you back here.
My dear wife, Coya, I want you to tell the people of the 9th District, Sunday, May 4th, 1958, that you are through with politics, that you want to go home and make a home for your son and husband. As your husband, I compel you to do this. I'm tired of being apart from my family. I'm sick and tired of having you run around with other men all the time and not your husband. I love you, honey. Your husband, Andy Knutson.
I don't want you running around with men in Washington, etc. She sort of put it aside as another letter from him. She wanted to think to the Republicans had had something to do with the letter. A lot of Republicans wanted that to be true, but it wasn't. It was her own people. The DFL party in Minnesota had only been formed in the 30s. It was fragile. They were just getting started. They were almost getting a majority in their state legislature and so on. And they were so worried that she was a farmer laborite. Her background was not Democratic. It was farmer labor. And they were afraid that she could rupture it. Coya Come Home, it sort of goes right along with the saying, woman's place is where? Women's place is in the home. And that was a very strong statement, but we'd gone through a war and women were no longer at home as much.
When the war has been won, the women in the Army will march shoulder to shoulder with the men in the great victory parades that will celebrate the return of peace to the world.
What is home economics? Is it the technical knowledge of the equipment in a home? Or the understanding of how to create beautiful clothes and more attractive homes?
I think for all of us women, our husbands and our children are central to our lives.
To put it another way, each girl has been preparing for two careers. One, her chosen specialty. The other is a career in homemaking.
As I wrote the book, I tried to tell how Coya did it and what happened with that family and how they managed, just to manage a life like that.
Today, I'm giving my first speech on the House floor. It's a great privilege to be here. I was sent to Congress to fight for equality and justice for Minnesota families and all American families. Today, I'm speaking out against...
Why did it take 42 years to elect another woman? I guess we'll all have to figure that one out. And it wasn't just Minnesota. Wisconsin, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, none had women in Congress until about 2000. Then it changed for the Midwest. Oh, she would be very happy. There were 17 women in Congress, including Coya. Now there are 127 women in the United States Congress. It's still only 25% of the entire Congress, but it's a tremendous change. I think today you are welcomed, and there are groups that help women especially. So go out there. We need you. You're 51% of the population. That means they're half of the best brains and ability in our country. So you should be out there.
Since the mid-1940s, Albert Lea Civic music has focused on bringing quality, professional music from all over the world to Albert Lea. Civic music was started by a group of local residents who had an appreciation for classical music. Their concerts bring in people from all over Minnesota and Iowa who appreciate world-class performances.
Well, Civic Music is an association that was put together 75 years ago by a group of people in Albert Lea to bring good classical music to the area. Being 100 miles from Minneapolis, there wasn't an opportunity for a lot of people to travel to the city to see concerts. I'm Eileen Nelson Nez from Albert Lea, Minnesota. My role in Albert Lea is I'm a musician, a church musician. I accompany, I teach lessons, and I direct choirs. Civic music has always been an important event in the community. Back in the days when it first started, people would dress up. The men would wear suits and the ladies would dress up in their furs and their hats, and it was an exciting thing to do. Years ago, we had Marian Anderson, who was an opera singer. Beverly Sills was here. Ferranti and Teicher was here. Isaac Stern came and did a concert for us. We've had the National Ballet. We've had Minnesota Symphony before they became Minnesota Orchestra. Timothy Chewy is on our docket for this last year. The board over the past few years have been trying to give a broad spectrum of musical acts that come to Albert Lea. So we try to go through a checklist. You know, we will include maybe a brass ensemble, something with strings, a choral group, something with dance, a piano. So we try to vary it up so it's not all one style of music. It's good to listen to music and all kinds of music because it reaches us in a way that, say, reading a book or looking at a piece of artwork doesn't. It has always been said that music soothes the soul, and it does. Many times a piece of music will remind you of a certain place or a certain time or something that has happened, and it can calm and it can give us reflection on what things have happened in the past. Civic Music Association has always been a subscriber membership kind of a program in which you purchase a season ticket, and that entitles you to all of the concerts that are in that particular season. Over the years, it has been changed by adding reciprocity with a couple of other community associations. For this year, you can go to probably 16 concerts for the price of one season membership. Our patrons today range from families to seniors. One of the things we try to do every year is try to encourage people with families and young children to come, even if they don't stay for the whole concert. I can remember when my boys were little, I would take them to the first half of the concert, and I thought if they were really good, you know, I did something really great, and so we would leave at intermission. You know, and as they got older, then they could stay for the whole concert. So, you know, it would be really fun to have the auditorium filled with young people and their families. I think it's a great way to introduce children to different types of music. That's one of the things we would like to see more of, is having, you know, young families, and sort of that 30, 40, 50 age group would be great. One of the things that people who come to the concert certainly enjoy is meeting with the musicians after the concert. They usually come out and they sign autographs and they sell their recordings and sign recordings and visit with people. And that gives a special rapport between the musician and the audience. And people really like that. They feel like they get to know the musician a little bit better. I think Civic Music's outlook is really quite good. We will be continuing doing our concerts and bringing in different artists. And we've also expanded. We have gone in partnership with Albert Lea Community Theater to bring live in HD the Metropolitan Opera from New York City. I have been on the board of Civic Music since the 1980s. That's an awfully long time. But I enjoy bringing different musicians to Albert Lea. It makes us a kinder and gentler human race if we have music because of the beauty that we have in music.
Brian Frink enjoys painting unusual abstract art. His love for painting and his articulate way of teaching is very evident. We joined Brian at a studio near Mankato at what used to be a poor farm as he transforms a blank canvas into a beautiful piece of art on a farm that's also being transformed into a gathering place for artists of all kinds to enjoy.
I think people get afraid of trying to appreciate art because they think they have to be super smart or intelligent or understand all these big words. You really don't, you really don't. I think people have to understand that the history of art is the history of humankind. My name is Brian Frink. I'm a painter. I live in southern Minnesota, right outside of Mankato, and I'm a professor at Minnesota State University in Mankato. Building a relationship with art, if you're not an artist, is pretty much the same as if you were an artist, except for the making part. You know, you're not making it. You have to learn the language of art that means something to you as an individual. So you start looking at art and you start literally just looking at it like, oh, this is what I like to look at, and then try to learn about it, try to figure out, you know, why you are drawn to it. And like any language, it takes time to learn its nuance. Taking a class helps, it really does, because it helps you learn the language. I consider myself a painter. I make paintings, I make drawings, and pretty much work flatly. I use oil paint, I use acrylic paint, I use watercolor, I use gouache, pencils and pastels, and pretty much anything that makes a mark. For me, I make my own stretchers and stretch my own canvas and then prime it and size it. My content, the stuff I paint and draw, is generally related to the landscape. I take great inspiration from looking at trees or the moon or the sun or whatever. I don't look at the sun that much, but just being in nature and being in the environment is important to me. My interest in water with my work goes way back to, I grew up right on a river. I spent a lot of time just sitting on the river looking at the water go by, waiting for something to happen. Back in 2012, I got a residency to make my art out on an island called the Great Cranberry Island. So it stimulated a whole series of work that I called Memory of Water, which had to do with thinking about water but not really painting water. And more recently with my magical landscapes, I think I've been using water as a kind of obviously it's a kind of a metaphor about the subconscious. It can mean a lot of things. It can mean transition, it can mean mystery, subconscious, and all these kind of things that I'm, I guess, interested in. Well, I think the hardest part is probably the self-motivation required, because you really have to make things out of nothing with no permission. Being an artist is very much like being an entrepreneur, yeah. I just try to keep making things. So like I have these things I've been doing every day. I call them my morning drawings. I've been doing them kind of now for about a month or so. So I'll just sit down and start a drawing and try to finish it in the morning. And then you know, it's just a good exercise, good way to wake up and stuff, so. I don't feel like I'm really expressing myself when I make my art. I feel like I'm exploring a connection between what I see in the world, what's around me, and what I make. And the idea is that another person will look at this thing and sort of have a connection. There's a connection made. I kind of think my work has a real populist appeal in some way. I mean, it's very abstract, but it's not like that severely abstract. When people come up and talk to me about my work, they're going to just tell me stories like when they were out camping, or when they were walking through the woods, or when they were walking down the road, or and they make these really interesting connections to their own life. And of course, it has nothing to do with what I was painting. And so I think that's the strength of a work of art, is it creates metaphorical connections. I think a work of art should be very sort of open to interpretation, because then the person can place their own experiences within that. You know, it creates a different kind of meaning, I think, so. How an artist knows when a work of art is done is probably one of the most commonly asked questions, but also the most interesting, because it's almost like, how do you know when your life is done? You don't, you know, it just happens. And so, unfortunately, they tell you, the work tells you, I think, when it's done.
Have you heard the expression, get the lead out? Well, for one Rochester resident, it's more like get the lead in. Bill Bean is a collector of pencils. He's collected thousands of pencils over the years. Bill is so serious and knowledgeable about pencil collecting that he gives public presentations about his hobby. We decided to take a look at his collection ourselves.
A lot of people have predicted that computers would totally replace pencils, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. There's always going to be a place for pencils. My name is Bill Bean. My hobby is pencil collecting, which has been a hobby for about 30 years now. I enjoy learning from pencils, about pencils. There are many different kinds of pencils. You can find humor, you can find unique advertising, you can find history. There are pencils that commemorate different presidents of the United States. Here's Jimmy Carter. Socks the cat. Was that Nixon, I think? Maybe had a cat named Socks. I got started kind of by accident, going to auctions, looking for old carpentry tools, and in the process found some pencils that seemed kind of interesting to me. Then found out there was a pencil collectors club. It's a national organization. It's referred to as the American Pencil Collectors Society. My number when I joined the Pencil Collectors Society, I was assigned the number 1300. Everybody gets a unique number, and my wife had this particular pencil box made up for me. I still sometimes go to auctions looking for them. I will stop at antique stores sometimes and see if they happen to have any. Most of them are not aware that anybody's even looking for pencils. Probably the best thing though is to go to the pencil collectors conventions, and people bring excess pencils. There's lots of opportunities there to pick up new pencils. There are left-handed pencils, and I've even got a category for that. These are pencils that are designed so that a person holding the pencil in their left hand can read what the message is. These are all wood pencils, mostly with advertising, and the business name happens to start with the letter B. This holds about 1,500 pencils. Tonight I'm going to be presenting for the community education program. It's a 2-hour program that I put together myself. Well, about mid-1500s in England, in what's called the Lake District, supposedly, according to one story anyway, during a storm, a tree fell over, turned up some black stuff from under the earth, and nobody knew what it was. Probably out of curiosity, they picked some of it up, found out they had a very messy hand. It was what we today call graphite, but they didn't have that term then. They had no idea what it was. Turns out that graphite was the thing that they really needed for a better writing tool.
Well, I started collecting pencils about a few years ago. Yeah, it is a little bit weird. I had no idea that there was anybody who was interested in pencil collecting here. I thought I was probably the only one out here.
Different companies all around the world are still making them by the millions. They're probably not going to be going out of business soon.
We've reached the end of this tour, Off 90. Thanks for riding along. See you next time. But before we go, here's a story about Lauren Mayer, a local henna artist in St. Peter.
The summer before 2015, I really got into body art. We found out that there was actually henna being sold in town at the African market, and we researched it a little bit, and we stopped in the shop and we bought some henna, and I started doing it on my mom and my friends. It was really bad, but I've gotten better since then. My name is Lauren Mayer. I am the proud owner of Happy Henna. A lot of the henna that I do are, when people are thinking about getting a tattoo, they come to me first and say, hey, can you try this on me? But then there's also people that are like, I've gone to families' homes during Eid, and I've done their whole family for that, and that's super cool. My clientele really is all over the place. 5-year-old little boys and girls getting a little cartoon fish, or ranging to up to 60-year-old men and women getting, extensive things from their hands to their elbows.
Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.